Good evening and welcome to KTN News. This is Point Blank. And before I tell you who my guest is today, let me tell you what he has done before.
John Githongo is the CEO of INUCA, a non-governmental organization involved in governance issues broadly defined with an emphasis on working with and for ordinary Kenyans, youth in particular. In doing this, INUCA is guided by the principles of respect and diversity in celebrating the depth and wealth of Kenya's cultures.
The Eurobond, which we borrowed $2 billion just the other day, is several times the size of the entire Rwandese economy. And yet, the Office of the Auditor General consistently raises questions about how these resources are spent.
Githongo is also the chairman of the Africa Institute for Governing with Integrity, Executive Vice Chair of the Mathare Youth Sports Association, Chair, Board Member of the Africa Center for Open Governance, AFRICOG, and a Commissioner of the Independent Commission on Aid Impact of the British government. Previously, he served as Vice President of World Vision, Senior Associate Member, St. Anthony's College, Oxford, Permanent Secretary in the Office of the President in charge of Governance and Ethics of Kenyan Government, Board Member, Transparency International, Berlin, CEO, Transparency International Kenya, and a Board Member of the Kenya Human Rights Commission. In the past, he has been a columnist for the East African, Associate Editor, Executive Magazine, and a correspondent for The Economist. In 2004, the German president awarded him the German Africa Prize for Leadership. In 2011, he was selected as one of the world's 100 most influential Africans by the New African magazine and one of the world's top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine. In 2012, he was shortlisted alongside U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for the prestigious Tipperary International Peace Award. October 2013, he was awarded the Oxil Award by the Washington Oxy Day Foundation that marks heroism and the defense of freedom. John is also a senior advisor of the Office of the President of South Sudan on governance. He holds an honors degree in economics and philosophy from the University of Wales and an honorary doctorate from the Open University. In 2003, he was appointed to the position of Permanent Secretary for Governance and Ethics by the then President Mwai Kibaki. He resigned from the position on 7 February 2005. He remains a powerful advocate against corruption.
John Muiruri Githongo, or John Githongo Muiruri. Correct me, what is it?
John Githongo Muiruri.
So, you are Githongo?
Yes.
And Muiruri is your father?
Correct.
And this country, by the way, John, I have to say this. You know, my father loved your dad so much. The best first cousins that life ever had. So my dad was Muiruri Gachoka.
Yes.
So Gachoka is me.
Yes.
So how do I have this order wrong? So is dad Gachoka or Githongo? How is
It's
it?
Githongo, Muiruri Githongo. And I am Githongo Muiruri.
So you are Githongo Muiruri,
Yes.
and I'm Gachoka.
And he flipped it.
Yes.
Yeah, when he traveled out of the country to study.
Yes.
Because it was, for some reason, it was easier for people to pronounce Githongo than Muiruri.
John, I will never forget that when Dad died, you came for me in Oxford.
Yeah.
And to hold my hand. Anyway, the country needs you, John. And there are some things I want to speak to you today. And I know corruption is the thing everybody knows, Githongo will say. But John, people are dying in Turkana. And Baringo, how can this?
You know, Tony, drought, lack of rain is caused by God. God can decide there's no rain. But when you have famine, when human beings start to die, it's man-made. It's people who are failing. This is not a poor country. I think you'd agree with that. So God causes drought. Famines are caused by men.
John, is there a problem in governance in Kenya? Because, you know,
there's an entire county government, minister, etc. And
county commissioner.
I mean, there's a whole infrastructure that should have ensured this doesn't happen. And what is particularly disappointing is they start by denying something which is obvious that people from Turkana are sending us photographs of. So it causes them also to lose credibility and us to lose our trust in them, that they're going to do anything about it. It's shameful that we are this rich
John,
country.
before we go to, is Uhuru asleep? Is the Minister of Devolution asleep? Is the county commander? I mean, John, we can't be quiet. You or I, this country is going to ask. The people who people listen to, civil society. John Githongo is here. And John, we are looking at Kenyans dying. 9, I heard yesterday, had died.
Tony, I'm more, you know, in terms of the people who are supposed to be managing this particular crisis around this, the people who are dying up in the north. My sense is even more negative than you think. I need to be convinced they care. I need to be convinced they care. If Tony Gachoka calls them, they'll jump and tell you we're doing A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. But this is a situation that has been brewing for some time. But if they cared, even an individual or a group of individuals could have mitigated this. So you begin to wonder, is it that they're busy here in Nairobi stealing and doing deals and not actually taking care of the issues that really matter to ordinary Kenyans?
So John Githongo, you're saying point blank that our government, my government, your government doesn't care?
Well, I mean, it's clear to me, and I've said this in many other forums, Tony, the most organized activity that this government has been engaged in. Number one was ICC, which they dealt with very, very ruthlessly, rigorously. The other major activity which has been engaged in is the theft from Kenyan people. It's a very organized, systematic, determined activity. Development is extracurricular. And that is very, very disappointing. And I think, for me, my hope comes out of when I see young people, when I listen to them on the streets, and I listen to them on social media as well, is that they get that. Yeah? They, 2013, 2014, 2015, they didn't really. Now they do. That development, your health, the education of your children, it's extracurricular. The primary activity for many, many powerful people who should enjoy public trust is to enrich themselves and their families. So Kenya remains a country where we can sit in this beautiful hotel.
John Githongo, you went to St. Mary's.
Yep.
The president was your classmate. You were
no, he was ahead of me by 2 years.
How by 2 years?
Yes. So I had no real interaction with him.
Right. And you are the head boy of St. Mary's.
In my last year, yeah.
So a lot of people say to me that this St. Mary's issue is what is bringing down the country. Because we want to go into corruption. Let's first of all talk about Uhuru Kenyatta and the people who people say control him. So now you are saying he was 2 years ahead of you. Who is Uhuru Kenyatta to you?
You know, Tony, I've heard people make that observation that, you know, the country has been handed over to a group of people from saints who are very good at holding parties but not running the country and delivering services. I think, like any other institution, you have both all kinds of people. It's a broad church. It is, however, quite sometimes embarrassing for some of us when some of our colleagues and people that we know are mentioned in scandal after scandal, and we say, I knew this person, I played rugby with this person, played soccer with this person, I was in chemistry class with this person. That is embarrassing.
You know, John, the country is asking, what are you and I doing? Because people say, if we are the kind of friends Uhuru has, are we not talking to him?
No, to be honest, I speak for myself. I'm not. I mean, there is no access to be able to advise the president around issues of corruption. He is very articulate. I've said this for the last 5-6 years. The most articulate president against corruption in the whole of East and Central Africa is Uhuru Kenyatta. His State of the Nation addresses, for example, very articulate. In terms of action, it is the exact opposite. That's
John,
ironic.
John, I want to say something. The country will know this. I and James Orengo organized for Uhuru Kenyatta to meet you in London.
Yep.
To discuss agro-leasing and corruption.
Yep.
And we can't go into the merits or not because of many defamation issues. So you met him.
Yeah.
And you know that I asked him to come and see you in London. What do you think of Uhuru Kenyatta? Did he listen to you?
I think, you know...
He was chairman then, PS.
Uhuru Kenyatta at the time was chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, which was inquiring into the Anglo-leasing scandal. And when I had an opportunity to sit down, I met with the Public Accounts Committee in Kenya where I was in government, and then in the UK after I had resigned from government. And he was thorough. You know, he was thorough. He produced, you know, a half-decent report. It wasn't a bad report. There were gaps in it, but he was thorough and committed and seized with the issue. That was my reading.
He took your report to Parliament.
Yes, he took it to Parliament, and in terms of trying to sitting down to understand the issues, because we had long sessions with the other MPs in that committee. From the questions that he was asking, he wanted to know what was going on, and he had done his homework, and he was thorough.
John Githongo, you left government because of agro-leasing.
Yeah.
And I know your convictions are strong. Did he listen? Did the country listen? Because where we are now, and before we go to the dams and everything else, agro-leasing is the thing that made you leave the Mwai Kibaki government.
Yeah.
What's your bird's eye view?
Agro-leasing was simply a methodology. It's like Goldenberg, you know. Goldenberg was many things. Agro-leasing was simply a methodology of stealing from Kenyan people.
Explain that. The Kenyans don't know that.
Basically, if you wanted to buy, the government wanted to buy tables or guns or bullets, Tony Gachoka and John Githongo form a company and in an offshore place, a fake company really, and then lend money to the Kenya government, which Kenya government pays interest on to buy those goods. So you wonder, why don't you go? I mean, it's one of the questions I used to ask people in government. Why are we buying from these middlemen when we can go? And some governments did come to us and say, listen, why are you going through anybody else? If you come to us directly, wanting to buy A, B, C, D, we'll even give you a soft loan.
So, John, there's a question Kenyans want.
But people wanted to steal the money. And unfortunately, that model of stealing using debt, commercial debt in that way, did not stop. So leasing continues.
I don't want to interrupt, but I was asking you, the Kenyans would like to know, you were chief advisor to Mwai Kibaki, matters corruption. When you went to him, did he listen to you? And is anyone talking to Uhuru? And is anyone listening?
For the first 8 months working with President Mwai Kibaki, he listened. He listened. And he took actions, around corruption. I can't go into all the details. If you look at the Dungo Commission report, it's a whole range of measures that he implemented that worked. He transformed the Kenya Revenue Authority, et cetera, et cetera. He professionalized. So a lot of that happened. It lasted around 8 months. What for me was very curious and very, very interesting, Tony, was Kenyans could sense it. During that period, Kenyans were ordinary Kenyans were arresting policemen who asked for bribes. I went out once with the Minister Odinga, he was then Minister of Public Works, because we were demolishing buildings for these bypasses. I was a PS in the Office of the President in Governance and Ethics. He was in Minister of Public Works, and we were concerned because we were demolishing buildings that had been built on road reserve land. So we went with GSU. Because we don't know how people would respond, because you're demolishing people's homes, especially poor people's homes near, on the side of Safari, near Thika Road. So we started in Kitisuru. We demolished some buildings there. Then we went to a big slum near, not far from Safari Park Hotel. It was for me the most moving time of my time in public service was that day, that afternoon when we arrived and we found ordinary Kenyans. We had come with GSU, thinking they will attack us for destroying their shanties, and they were tearing down their own shanties.
Cause of corruption.
They were tearing down their own shanties and telling us, asanteni sana. Tumesikia vile mmefanya pande ile. They had heard what had happened in Kitisuru, and they said, continue the fight against corruption. We will find new places.
So John, Mwai Kibaki's legacy, in John Githongo's eyes, on corruption, will people ever remember he sacked the ministers, including Mweraria, everyone else?
I think, unfortunately, that legacy, I think, all leaders do both good and evil. Unfortunately, the missteps and mistakes, especially around corruption, and the lies told to fellow politicians, or the disagreements that arose, caused us to almost have a civil war. 2007, 2008. I think, John, that's what is the defining
because there's a legacy. Time when Kibaki brought Michuki.
Yes.
And I'm going to the next step, as you know.
Yeah.
But was there a time he tried or he couldn't?
I think
deal with the Uhuru after.
As I said, he definitely tried. For several months, he tried. And one, I think, the pressures on a leader, those pressures, some of them are personal, some of them are of different kinds. And therefore, the importance of dealing with corruption that is undermining so much in a country like Kenya goes down. In Kenya.
So John, we are with Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, loved by many, our generation of president. Is the Uhuru generation going to let corruption take down Kenya?
Right now, the Uhuru generation is defined by corruption. We never have so few Kenyans stolen so much from so many in such a short time. I mean, the scandals are shocking. And actually, I have somebody in the office whose job is just to enter them into a program, just to be able to keep up with how much is being misappropriated and being lost. So corruption is the defining characteristic of Uhuru Kenyatta's regime. He is clearly attempting to change that now, but right now it is the defining characteristic.
So John Githongo, Kenyans know you, trust you. Point blank, I'm asking, is Uhuru Kenyatta a hostage of anybody? Because the headlines are clear. He's at war with his deputy. We really need today to break this down. So John, will you help Kenya? Tell us what's going on. Tell us what's going on.
Tony, if you're going to start an anti-corruption campaign around the world, the model is that you start it in the first 18 to 24 months of a new administration. Then you can get a lot done. Starting an anti-corruption campaign when a lot of stealing has gone on is always difficult and it's always political. So I know there's a lot of debate about, some people saying it's too political, it's ethnic, no matter what is done and no matter, what the officials who are involved say, this is now a political fight. In fact, I would go as far as to say, technically, we have reached the glass ceiling in the fight against corruption in Kenya. We have DPP, we have CID, we have Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Attorney General. If you look at our legal and institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption, it's the best in East and Central Africa. Kenya and Uganda actually get very good marks from international agencies for having good infrastructure, yet we're very corrupt. So it's for us to acknowledge that the problem is political. And so it's not a matter of Uhuru being hostage, but for him making a choice.
But Mr. Githongo, you made names and headlines by naming and shaming.
Yes.
And it's becoming worrying to me that John Githongo is silent. You can't name and shame.
In what way, Tony?
We are dealing with this monster.
Yes.
And the evidence, as you say, the DPP, everybody's working.
Yes.
And it's coming to one name every single day.
I mean, I think the name that you want me to mention is the deputy president. Everyone wants, the narrative that one of the narratives that is out there is that the deputy president William Samoei Ruto is the guru of corruption in the Jubilee administration, and that's a narrative that's been pushed out there. But when I go back to 2013, this corruption didn't start yesterday. So clearly, there's an entire regime that is involved in the stealing. There are many. So
is it Uhuru?
Hold on. I mean, who is corrupt? Uhuru is head of state and commander-in-chief. Ultimately, the buck stops with him.
So is he corrupt?
He is ultimately responsible for all that is going on. So let's not beat around the bush about it. You can make good speeches, and yes, the deputy president is exposed, as are many people. But ultimately, it's him who has to answer the questions.
John, I would ask you, after dealing with Kibaki, and you went directly to him, and now Uhuru is listening to you, Deputy Ruto and other people are listening to you. This country can't be unambiguous. It's rare that you are on television. And I'm asking you point blank, who is the master of corruption, and what do we Kenyans want to hear from John Githongo?
Well, I'm not sure what Kenyans want to hear from John Githongo. I'm always cautious in attributing all, Kenya's got such a huge problem with systemic corruption. I'm not going to attribute it to one person. Even though the deputy president's name is the one that is in the media, there's talk about the dams, and some of his supporters have been very vocal in defending some extremely dubious transactions. But I think, as the Chief Justice said at a recent meeting, there's an entire cabinet. One side, we've spent a lot of time looking at, discussing the formal institutions, and they're busy. The DPP is very busy, the Attorney General is quite busy, EACC, etc., DCI, they're all very busy. But sometimes we don't spend enough time also studying the informal institutions that run Kenya.
Good question, John. There.
And that includes family.
Yes.
That includes friends.
Yes.
And that's when...
John, as PS, that's what your job was, to look at how things are working, the agencies.
Yes.
DCI, DPP, and how?
My own sense, and especially now, this is the irony. We have as I said, we have some of the best institutional infrastructure for fighting corruption in Africa. DPP's office is well-resourced. It's got a leader who is forthright, Directorate of Criminal Investigations. We have a Supreme Court, the judiciary. And all of them, even with their problems, are much better than in many other countries. So it forces us the question, hold on, if we have such a good infrastructure of law and institutions to fight corruption, perhaps we're not looking at the right place. And I think really the right place is in the cabinet, president and all his ministers, and their families, and the informal structures which hold entire institutions hostage. I heard a Rift Valley farmer calling it, kwani ni nini hii mnyama inaitwa cartel? Tukienda pande hii iko cartel. And I think that when we speak of cartels, we've got to ask ourselves, is the country almost at a situation where it is run by a cartel? And when you have that kind of situation, you can have the best DPP in the world, you can have the best legal infrastructure for fighting corruption, but it becomes a situation where you're choosing between which thief do I go after first.
You're watching KTN News, and this is Point Blank. John Githongo says that although we hear Ruto's name, Uhuru cannot walk away from this. We'll be back soon. This is KTN News and Point Blank, and I'm here with John Githongo, rarely on television, here to break it down for us. George Kinoti, Nordin Haji, fighting corruption, a job you've done before. First of all, what do you think of them?
I think, if you look at the DCI, George Kinoti, you look at Mr. Haji, you look at the Attorney General, these are people who have brought a new energy to the fight against corruption at the technical level. And I think I'm going to continue emphasizing to you, Tony, that we have the people, and at the technical level, we have the institutions and the legal infrastructure. But that phase of the fight against corruption has ended, not only for Kenya, but for many countries around the world. Because when you look at all the countries that have got anti-corruption agencies around Africa, we see, hold on, these agencies haven't had that much of an impact. Why? Because there's an entire informal system that is made up of largely the political class, their family and friends that are actually governing our countries. And until we crack that, so it's more than political will. It's about our political leaders looking into the mirrors and saying, hold on, do we want another 2007 and 8 kind of disruption? Do we want, to continue hobbling along?
John, I'm coming there, but just for credibility purpose, and I'm sorry to ask you point blank, but I must. You're saying there's no credibility issues you see by the people who are leading, because questions have been asked. Political leaders have hit at the director of criminal investigations. They've had, and Kenyans would want to know what John thinks about it, because if they think
not only Tony, the director of criminal investigations is under attack politically. When you fight corruption, you get attacked politically. As I said, especially when you're doing it this late in the day. So there's nothing unusual about that. He'll also be attacked ethnically. I saw that the DPP had to issue a list, an ethnic audit of people that he had prosecuted. I've also seen in the media of media beginning to question whether the DPP is too much of a media person and not enough of an action person. I think we put an unfair weight on these institutions and individuals, and we remove the responsibility from the political actors.
So let's go there.
Pulling the strings.
John, let's go there. Let's go there. Okay. I want to ask you point blank.
Yeah.
My friend Raila Amolo Odinga.
Yes.
Is he going to be swallowed? Will this thing consume him?
That is the question that...
No, but I'm asking you. I'm not asking the people. I'm asking John Githongo. Is Raila Odinga silent?
Raila Odinga, a month ago, entered into a handshake agreement with Uhuru Kenyatta that ended the tension that we had in 2017. And I think people are relieved about that. We're still waiting to see what are the concrete deliverables out of that.
Mr. Githongo, not we.
Yes.
I'm asking point blank.
Yes.
John Githongo. Raila is watching you now. Talk to him.
Well, for me, it's, for...
He's here, he's watching. Tell him.
I will tell Bwana Raila, say, listen, very good. You're a master political operator. What is this going to give to Kenyans? Not to Kenyans just for now, but in posterity. And not only for a few Kenyan politicians, a few Kenyan families, but for the majority of our population.
Will corruption define Raila Odinga? If he's any longer silent?
As I said, the corruption defines this administration. And those who get sucked into it are invariably tarred with that brush. He has his credentials as a reformer in terms of fighting for the constitution. He's been detained for many of the changes that we have in Kenya. For the freedom that you and I are enjoying now just to be able to have this conversation, he has suffered for it. So he has that, his petrol tank of credibility is still quite heavy. But he's gone into an arrangement which needs to start delivering concrete governance results for the majority of people. Otherwise, people begin to talk about him being sold.
So Mr. Githongo, the handshake, Uhuru and Raila, and now you're telling them, you've been there. You used to advise Mwai Kibaki, who has left, I would think, a fairly good legacy in Kenya. Now Odinga and Uhuru are listening to you. What are you telling them?
Well, we're waiting. I think people are waiting to see what comes out.
John, I'm not going to let you about waiting. What are you telling them?
I think we need, as quickly as possible, I think the vehicle of the handshake, for me, from what my understanding is the Building Bridges initiative. We need to see the deliverables from that initiative very quickly, because it's been a year now. They've been going around the country. What are they going to propose in terms of a political way forward? What's the deal? We've heard of discussions around a referendum. What are the suggestions and changes that are being recommended vis-a-vis that referendum? Is it a self-serving one for politicians, or is it one that concretizes the constitution that we promulgated in 2008? So for me, those are the questions I would ask. I say, listen, is this an opportunity for us to go backwards, for an elite pact, for us to go backwards and undermine this constitution? Or is it an opportunity for us to be able to strengthen the constitution, strengthen the most important parts of it, like devolution, which Kenyans take very seriously, and to begin to deal with this sort of, this culture where corruption has been normalized, where conflict of interest has been normalized in our society, and has led to a cynicism that has made, even when the government tries to do positive things, makes it very difficult.
Because, John, there's a reason I'm asking you this. When I saw you in my office when Kibaki was president, he made action. He fired Mwiraria, he fired Murungaro, he fired Matere Kereri. Kibaki acted. And I'm just wondering why you can't tell me why Uhuru is... because you see, is this going to be in the courts?
But I told you...
Should this be in the courts? Or?
I said that only worked for a while. Number one. Number two, and so, Anglo-leasing swallowed him. Number two, unfortunately, the most blunt instrument available in the fight against corruption is the law, is the legal system. Because the corrupt have the money. Their lawyers are better paid than the government's lawyers. That is not only a Kenyan problem, it's a global problem. Prosecuting serious, complex corruption cases is difficult even in the most mature democracies. So it requires political action to be taken by leaders so that people can begin to regain the biggest thing that has been lost in Kenya is public trust. So recently we had a marathon, the First Lady's marathon, Zero, I think.
Yeah, Beyond Zero.
Beyond Zero. The First Lady is really the most popular part of the presidency.
Actually, yes.
Yeah, she's she sticks to her issues.
Credible.
Yeah,
honest.
Doesn't comment on politics. But this time, for the first time, you saw again questions, cynicism about it, questions being asked about it, photographs being circulated of people who, one lady who seemed to have won two medals for two different distances. So this sense, especially amongst young people,
John, let me
that
ask
we're being conned.
You are, I think, among the leading experts in Africa. But in Kenya, if people get an understanding, what has been looted in the last 10 years? And why would you say the last 2 years are more than, what are, in Kenya shilling terms, ili wananchi wasikie, Githongo amesema.
There's a corruption tracker website which combines what is reported, what the Auditor General reports, what is being prosecuted by the DPP, the DCI, and the figure that they put was 6.6 trillion shillings. That's $66 billion US.
Mr. Githongo, point blank. See, I levy those figures.
No,
no. I'm asking again.
Atamimi,
No. John, point blank, how much?
I told you at the beginning, Tony.
Trillion.
Never, except when we had the Imperial British East Africa Company, never has so much been stolen from Kenyans by so few in such a short time.
No, John Githongo, again, John Githongo, I'm asking you at KTN News.
Yes.
How much has gone? How many?
No,
just if you say
I quoted a particular
I know, but
corruption tracker.
How many trillion?
It's in the figure they give is 6.6 trillion. I think it may not be that much. But even if it's a fraction of that, even if it's a trillion, if it's $10 billion or 20, that has restructured not only our economy, most importantly, it has restructured the way we think about public service. It has restructured the way we think about government.
John, these are crimes against humanity.
It reaches that level. That's how people are. I said, people are dying in Turkana. And you started with that question. How come people are dying in Turkana? And we have this sort of conspicuous consumption around wealth in places like Nairobi. And for the first time, on being asked that question, before one could blame incompetence. Yes, corruption has always been there. But with the kind of government machinery and the kind of wealth that we have in this society, the fact that people are dying like that means somewhere somebody doesn't care. It's just another Turkana. Tony Gachoka and a Standard Nation will talk about it next week. There'll be another thing. It'll go. They're gone. They're dead. And you judge a country and it's by how it treats its poorest people.
So that this country can be saved, you said the handshake was good. It brought political stability.
Yeah.
It has given opportunity to the government. Is it now time for the handshake to slaughter corruption? Or it will go down, they will lose their legacy?
I think we are loading a lot onto something which we don't yet fully understand. Yeah, I said we have the handshake, we have the communique that was issued.
I'm asking John because with the handshake, you have Jubilee, ODM together.
Yeah.
Kalonzo is also playing ball.
Yes.
I hear Mudavadi is also talking anti-corruption.
Yes.
I've not remembered a time in Kenya where politics is not anti the government.
Yes.
And so when you were there, it was difficult because the other side wasn't fully. I'm wondering why can it be done if there is.
It wasn't necessarily difficult, Tony. It wasn't necessarily difficult. I think you're misunderstanding it, and I think it would be a mischaracterization. When you don't have when you have a systemically corrupt situation without an opposition, then that's like opening the floodgates to corruption. It's when when Uhuru Kenyatta was chairman of the Public Accounts Committee and head of KANU.
And he came to London.
And he would search.
To meet you.
Yeah, you require that kind of political capacity to deal with corruption at the top. So don't presume that, don't add too much to the handshake. Let's wait. The Building Bridges initiative is going on. They're going to produce a report. It's going to make some recommendations, and then we shall see.
I'm just saying point blank to you, was the handshake a license to loot Kenya? Has it then opened the doors?
It's a question that can be asked. It's a question that can be
But
asked.
I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know. All I can say, it was accompanied by a reinvigoration of the fight against corruption at the technical level. Yeah, so that's when we saw the DPP, the Attorney General, etc., Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission become a bit more energetic. And so we'd like to think that it created that environment where...
Last week, James Orongo was here, and I asked your friend, I know you and Jim go a long way.
Yeah.
I asked him, why can't we have rallies from Afraha to Tananoka to Hurupa to Kamkunji about corruption. What has happened?
Try.
No, but I'm asking you. What can you?
We can definitely do it. I think.
Are you going to leave this to editors and newspapers?
No,
the people.
No, they're important. They're critical. They have the cold face of the fight against corruption, because we find out about it from yourselves first, right? Because you put it together, right? Then we have the Auditor General and such important institutions as well. I am not entirely certain, and I would like to see, I would be very, very excited if we were to go around the country with the political leadership talking about corruption.
So point blank, with John Githongo attend.
I would be happy. I would attend that one.
If there's a rally, if Raila calls a rally, and will you attend as Githongo?
If we are all together, we will.
I will
attend.
John Githongo be there, even if you're 10 men?
I will attend. I will attend, so long as we are think the truth and call it as it is.
To shame and to talk about this thing.
Absolutely.
So, John, is that why?
The reason, I think the question you not ask yourself, Tony, is why hasn't it been happening in an environment where it should be easier than ever before? Because we've had the handshake, the kind of antagonisms that we saw in 2017 have been satiated. This is a time when people can go around together and be able to feed off the energy of the people who are extremely unhappy about what corruption is doing to them, especially vis-a-vis the cost of living, and be able to create
John,
a movement.
I'm not going to give you an escape. Uhuru has been born in privilege, and Raila has been born in privilege.
Yes.
And I'm asking you, because I want them to know, are you saying that corruption is a key matter affecting this country today?
Yes, it is.
And you're saying,
without doubt.
And you're saying,
without doubt,
it's not for the courts or the DCI.
No, it is for them as well. But we cannot load it. The amount of let's talk about these dams. This is the most recent exciting political case. 20-something billion shillings paid out to Ghost. If that case were to be prosecuted, will take time. Will take time. And the kind of weaknesses in some of those institutions will become very apparent. Now, imagine throwing 100 of those at those institutions. They will simply buckle under the pressure. So, therefore, the need for the political action to be taken directly. That some of the people who are exposed, who have lost public trust.
I think, John, that's the important question. I want you to explain to Kenyans. You've been the PS anti-corruption. So what you're simply saying, just a drum case, 200 people are being tried or implicated. You're saying the capacity even to
prosecute those 200 is limited.
Unajua mwananchi wa kawaida haelewi
kutoka
kuandika statement.
Mwananchi anaelewa. Do you know why mwananchi anaelewa? Because ordinary citizens are in court all the time, especially over land matters. And how long do those matters take? Just a chicken lost. A dispute between a tenant and the landlord can take a very long time. So these are not perfect, these are not surgical instruments for dealing with a problem that afflicts our society. It's a huge tumor on our back, and we're sort of taking little pins and thinking that we'll wipe it out with that. This requires political action, where it is very surprising.
John, we have
I happened to pass by the CID headquarters, and I saw a lot of your cameras there.
Yes.
And I asked, iko nini hapa? And I was told, hapana, the Cabinet Secretary of Finance ako ndani anahojiwa kwa sababu ya hii maneno ya dams. Now, just think about it. That's how far we've slid. That the Minister of Finance is being questioned for days at CID headquarters and doesn't think that I have lost public trust. Let me step aside and allow these investigations to finish. And so that the government's people's confidence in the government is sustained a little bit. But instead, people are retained. Even when they are removed, they're demoted or sent to be ambassadors somewhere, they're,
recycled.
They're recycled. That's what demonstrates.
John, that's worrying.
It is worrying. And it should worry us, especially considering the kind of economic situation.
So a police commissioner resigns, he's an ambassador, or I don't know what appointment.
Exactly.
So it's it's as though the president is beholden.
As I said, people talk of rackets here and there, and don't stand back and look at the informal systems
Look, John,
that are in place.
for the countries, let's look at Jomo Kenyatta, retired President Moi, retired President Kibaki, and Kenyatta. And just really, and I know your back is on the wall on this question. Have you seen this? Is Kenyatta unable to be firm?
I mean, we can. I mean, I really don't know. I don't know what he's. I don't know what he's thinking. What is clear is that ever since he took that office, despite being quite emotional and speaking quite strongly about this issue, he has been singularly unsuccessful in dealing with it. In fact, more theft has happened under him than under any other leader we've had in this country. That contradiction is one that is difficult to explain. It's a hard one to explain, that we have one narrative coming from the top, but here amongst...
but John, David D was here. And David D says it's not a he thinks that Kenyatta serves his own interest. He doesn't serve the country's interest.
So
I'm asking you point blank.
That's a point I made, I think.
Are we going to tell truth to power? Is this about Ruto or is this about Kenyatta?
It's about both of them. They're tied at the hip. It's one of the things that our current constitution does, is tie them at the hip, which explains the confidence. Yes, we have noises being made, political noise, which Kenyans enjoy, and it's reported in great detail by media. But the Constitution ties them at the hip. The ICC brought them together.
I want you to expand about that a bit, because Kenyans don't know your views of that. Explain that a little.
Well, I mean,
what you thought the ICC did.
Well, I'll be honest,
just to bring it together, just a political.
I mean, they stood for president and deputy president under indictment from the ICC. Now, my views on the ICC are not...
how they brought together, not all the way.
Well, I think, if you're facing the world's international criminal court, which is going to end your life as you know it, that is something.
So we have a political compromise.
Yes, we have a political deal that comes out of
which ties out
of that. Yeah, I mean, I was always I was never a supporter of us going to the ICC. I always felt, this thing of don't be vague, go to the Hague, don't be vague, go to the Hague, introduced an instrument in our society that has had a political, effect that's unfortunate and which we could have dealt with, perhaps within the African context more efficiently. So yes, if you look at the first 2-3 years of the Jubilee regime, the most effective, efficient activity by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Office of the President, was in dealing with ICC. All the stadiums and other things that had been promised fell by the wayside as that project was prosecuted. And it was prosecuted very efficiently. They finished with that one. They finished with that one. And now, I think, understandably, Uhuru has to look at his legacy. And it's not only his legacy, it's not Uhuru's legacy. It's a legacy of his father, of the family. The Kenyatta family name is inextricably intertwined with the history of Kenya. Yeah? We used to have a Kenyatta Day. Yeah, we have Kenyatta Avenue, across Africa and across the black world. There are many young people, even in America, called Kenyatta. So
and Uhuru Park.
And Uhuru Park, exactly. So
Uhuru has a name.
This is where he makes it or loses it. You see, and ironically, he's chosen the issue, which is corruption, that has proven to. He's very, as I said, he's very articulate about it, but has proven to be a challenge to him. He's thrown the bulk of the challenge to the technicians. And they're working very hard. They're very busy. They're on TV, they're on radio, they're arresting people. We've got Queen's Counsels being brought in from UK to help. But that's not where the problem resides. It resides.
This is KTN News, and it's point blank. Corruption czar, internationally respected John Githongo, anaambia Odinga na Kenyatta, corruption will be the thing you must deal with. We'll be back soon. This is KTN News, point blank. It's not every day you get corruption guru, our czar, John Githongo. Reminds me of Abraham Lincoln, who said, maybe any man can stand adversity. But you know, if you want to know a man's character, you give him power. Mr. Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, you are in power. John, welcome back to Point Blank.
Thank you very much.
I'm wondering, worldview, what do you see and where are we and why?
Oh, it's a very interesting time for the world. I mean, huge changes economically. China, Russia, Turkey, Iran, India are all now major powers. So what had thought to be the case that we'd have the US as the only superpower for a long time after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it's been proven to be a bit different.
The Berlin Wall was people power, John.
It was people power. It was assisted by a lot of external
Jim
support, but it's
me
true.
That he wants to call you. Do you want to talk to him?
I'd be happy. I mean, that's Jim Githongo. So, I mean, absolutely, we are most happy.
He wants to have people in Afraha Stadium.
Absolutely, it's fine. If we're talking about corruption, fine. But Tony, sometimes we Kenyans are very obsessed by our own little things going on here. Look what's happening in Togo. Look what's just happening in Sudan. Look what's just happened in Algeria. Look what's happening in Uganda with this young man, Bobby Wine. Look at South Africa with the economic freedom fighters. Across the continent, and it's not, maybe it's mainstream media has not been that good in following it up, but in social media one sees that especially in the millennial generation, people below the age of 35, below the age of 40, who recognize that they will not be able to have properties for their children to inherit, where education has become a challenge, the cost of living is rising. This generation is a lot more restive. 2 years or 3 years after the next election, there'll be more Africans than Chinese. By the end of the century, 30% of the world will be Africans. So it's a huge change taking place. It's a major opportunity. And for me, the thing that makes me sad is that at Kenya, we have the human capacity to take advantage.
John, I need to push you. After David D was here, 6 million Kenyans watch KTN, point blank. And they're watching John Githongo.
Yeah.
And it's an issue that I'm asking. Do we leave this to the courts? What do we tell our people?
There is no way you can, I said, the issue that we are calling corruption here, the cartel is the system that is ordering the investigations.
So it's the state.
It's not even the state. The state is simply an adjunct of these informal systems of power that includes families and people who've served in the state before that run the rackets. There's competition now. There's because of the inequalities are deep. It's easy to ethnicize those inequalities. Poverty is manageable. Inequality is much more difficult to manage politically, and it gives difficulty not only to developing countries but to developed ones as well. And trying to almost trick people with governance events, even when you're not very good at them. We had two elections, Tony, in 2017. If I was asked a very blunt question, point blank, as you would say, the last real election we had was in 2002. 2013 was a bit of a fake. 2017 was a crash out. Now, this year, we need to do a census. Every 10 years, we do a census, and then redraw our boundaries. Then there's talk of doing a referendum. Even there's discussion of Punda imechoka, so let's see whether we can fix devolution, which I think is...
John, can we afford?
Financially, is one question. First of all, we don't have the money, but not only being able to afford it financially, but to afford it politically, and just in terms of our own state of mind as a Kenyan people, to go through these. Every time we have these sort of wrenching governance events, they're extremely dislocating for Kenya, and so I am doubtful that we can do them all.
Ngoja pole pole hapo. Kwa meza ya Uhuru kuna corruption. Kwa meza ya Uhuru kuna census na referendum. So what are you saying? You can't handle all? Shouldn't?
So when you're juggling those are big, big governance balls, elections, referendum, etc. You cannot juggle them all at the same time. It was the big mistake that Kibaki made. We had a referendum in 2005. He blew that. That caused a rigged election in 2007. We almost had a civil war. And to come out of it, we had now in 2008 promulgation of a new constitution. So it's dangerous.
No, kulikuwa John Githongo akatoa mambo ya agronisi.
Yes, I mean, Nabado.
So, like now we have dams.
Exactly, and so the biggest damage that things like the dams do, that all the corruption does, is that people stop believing what government says. So even if we hold an election, the results come out and they'll be doubted. Why? Because these are thieves running it. So you've got to deal with the fundamental corruption issue that is in the DNA of this. You've got to deal with it and convince people that you're trying to deal with it. Otherwise, even when you're doing good things, I look at, I'll give you an example, Tony. There is this online government service where you can get your passport, you can, e-citizen. And I went on to that, and I found it very useful and efficient. And but sitting in front of a group of millennials below the age of 35, they were very cynical about it. This one is a racket. That one is a racket. Now, when you have young people talking like that, then you want to hold a referendum.
The Ministry of Education gives you a certificate. Yes. Nobody believes you pass.
Yes. Or when you have a court, I think, was it a court which said that even if you don't have a PhD, but it sounds as if you do, you're taken as if you have one. So,
Mr. Githongo, your time is valuable, and the country is watching you. The handshake stabilized politics. You are touched about it.
The handshake,
can the handshake be consumed by impunity?
The handshake it's 1 year ago this month, really sort of gave us time to breathe in, because 2017 was hectic. We had two failed elections and a huge amount of tension. The dams and the contradictions, the political contradictions that will come out of trying to deal with the corruption, if it is not dealt with in an honest, frank, and holistic way, the handshake will become a pimple on the backside of an elephant.
John, you're not going to walk away from this. Assuming you don't trust Uhuru Kenyatta, although he was ahead of you at St. Mary's, assuming it's Odinga you trust, is Odinga trustworthy? Will he help in this handshake? Will he tell us if something is wrong?
I think
point blank.
I think point blank. I think after 1 year, people are beginning to ask what's the real deal between these two gentlemen. So they have to answer that question quite soon, because some of these governance events are on the way. Census, elections, boundaries. They have to answer it quite quickly. And so it's not a matter of them being trusted or anything. It's them delivering to create an environment that makes these things
No,
possible.
John, that's not enough for me because Odinga has been detained. He has been jailed.
He has the pedigree of supporting. You know, as I said, we would not be sitting here having this conversation if it had not been for some of the things that Odinga has fought for. You know,
So he bought Kenyatta time.
he has.
That's why the country is quiet.
The legitimacy that Uhuru Kenyatta
So
enjoys
point
right
blank.
now was handed to him in a handshake. By
This
Raila
one, like
Odinga.
this one.
Like that.
So point blank.
Yeah. Up to that moment, I mean, look at the second election in 2017. How many people showed up? Even in Central Province, how many people showed up? Then Raila shakes hands and grants Uhuru a huge amount of legitimacy.
John,
that he
why,
not have.
am I and you giving Odinga too much space?
What do you mean that we're giving him too much space?
I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
The handshake had 9 points.
Yes.
Among them, corruption.
Yes.
You said over 6 trillion has never been stolen.
Yes.
You've never seen.
I think it is now that we are asking those questions, and I think it's fair. I think it's good sometimes to give time. Politics, things don't happen overnight, but 1 year after the handshake, now is when people are beginning to ask, what was this about?
Julius Malema named the Guptas.
Yes.
And Kenyans may not know. You can tell them what happened with Zuma, Malema, and Zuma, and the Gupta.
I mean, the South Africans call it state capture. It's beyond corruption. It's where you repurpose even the institutions, the judiciary, the police. You change their orientation and you repurpose them to steal. And I was telling my South African friends, I was there they invited me to talk about state capture, and I said, listen, you people are talking about state capture that Gupta and a few people came to do the other day. We've been living in a condition of state capture since before independence. We've been reforming it with difficulty, detaining people, changing the constitution.
Mr. Githongo,
but we're in the
this is
grip.
our son from Central.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you, because Uhuru is our brother. I just want to ask you, how can the deputy president threaten him? I had Mukomen and other people last week say, fire me or do... I read the Nation headlines and other medias this week. President hostage. Mr. Githongo, I want to take the rare opportunity to ask you questions because this country needs your word. Are we in a political crisis?
I'm not a political expert, but politicians...
You advise Moi Kibaki?
Politicians who are in the same boat and have disagreed will threaten each other and they'll take action against each other. That you can take it from me. Forget the threats. I mean, I think we're still. This is still very early in the game, where people are talking and it's quite exciting. We're seeing it in the media.
When you took a decision,
the stakes are very high.
When you made a decision to name AgroListen,
Yeah.
it cost you your job.
Yes.
With Moi Kibaki.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Kenya. I mean, you are at the center. You are Moi Kibaki's right-hand man.
But then you stay there.
Yes.
Right? You have two choices. It's a cartel. You stay there and become a thief. but then you do a few good things. And many friends told me, they said, John, you can't do good things all the time. Kula kidogo, do a few good things.
Nyamaza.
Yeah, exactly. And I really do believe that that's a reason. We always compare ourselves to Malaysia, to Singapore, that we were at the same level of development. It's that particular kind of really pathetic attitude by some of our most respected leaders, former ministers and intellectuals and business people, that kind of cheap, sort of amoral attitude that has left left us as a bunch of thieves stealing from each other. That it's in our churches where you go for communion carrying your handbag, and you go to small countries, Lesotho, Botswana, and you suddenly realize,
I'm beginning to see a scenario.
It's working.
Let me ask you. President Moi retired, supported Uhuru, and lost the election. Uhuru lost.
Yeah.
Could it be possible that Odinga thinks that he will get Uhuru support, and it may not be enough? Where we are right now, and I have to ask you three things.
Yeah.
You talked about state capture.
Yeah.
In South Africa, it was never 6 trillion. Bwana Githongo, in this, how many, 8 years, how much has been looted?
As I said,
From the Kenyan people.
we've been in a condition of state capture for much longer. We have entire institutions, as I said, they've been repurposed. On paper, you look at the Constitution and the enabling legislation, it says they're supposed to do one thing, but in actual fact, they're owned by racketeers. I am not an expert in terms of predicting how this political detente...
But you're an expert on governance.
Yeah. Well, yes,
I'm asking
yes.
you on governance issues, not on politics.
In terms of this political detente that is there between Uhuru and Raila, let's see where it goes. One thing that I always have learned is that one of the most essential and consistent ingredients of politics at that level is betrayal. So in all this game that's being played now, betrayal is coming at the very top level between the president, Raila Odinga, and the deputy president. Yeah. And it will be verbalized much more acutely over time. And how that changes our politics remains to be seen.
Obviously, Point Blank will be talking to you many, many times about this. But John, I want to go to another issue. And this issue is, what do you yourself think about the 2010 Constitution? This proposed referendum, expensive as you say it is, are there laws that would help this country move forward? Is the proposed amendments, are they political in your view? Are they necessary?
Well, I think we had the 2008 Constitution was a progressive constitution by African. It's one of the best on the African continent. I'm slightly suspicious when politicians start talking about changing it. We've heard of discussions of term limits for governors being removed. We've heard this narrative of Punda imechoka, that devolution is too expensive, which I think is a con. It's simply the center that wants to continue stealing and therefore doesn't want to give to the counties. And yes, there's corruption in the counties, but when I go around, the counties, ordinary wananchi are very pragmatic. They say, yes, hapa tuko na shida ya ufisadi, lakini afadhali tunaona pesa zinakuja zinasaidia. You can see the economic activity and energy that has been brought by devolution. So if these changes that are being mooted attack some of those key pillars in this constitution, then we will have a problem. We will have a problem. And I think that for me, it would be very difficult to support sort of the stripping down.
So under Mwai Kibaki, we had the national coalition government, and under Uhuru, we have taken this handshake. The issue I'm asking, because the opposition is not in government, had Odinga argued to have a transformative government to manage and help matters, I would imagine the likes of Githongo and others would have entered. Would that, do you think it was a mistake to have a casual handshake and not to have it legalized through a coalition government, as opposed to what happened under your head of state, Mwai Kibaki?
In 2017, as it came to an end, we had a regime that had no credibility. They botched 2 elections. The economy was in a mess. And the country was deeply divided. And there were many ways that could have been resolved. A structured conversation, discussion, perhaps would have resulted in something different. However, what was chosen is what we have called the handshake between Uhuru and Raila.
Which is not formal, it's a handshake.
It's a handshake.
There's no real change in government.
Yeah. It has no,
What's your view about, should it have evolved more?
For me, that's a moot question, because in politics, Tony, it has happened. It is the reality that we are dealing with. I can talk about theory of what should have happened, what shouldn't have happened, but that just becomes theory. This has happened. I mean,
So is Kenya respected in Africa for it? Is there something greater than war, than bloodshed?
Many.
Are we being too hard on them, Odinga and Kenyatta?
No. Many Africans, especially looking from the outside, and that I talked to, including African leaders, were quite excited because they saw the kind of tension that we had in 2017. They saw the 2 failed elections, and so they saw it as a sign of great maturity that that Uhuru and Raila could stand in front of Harambee House and shake hands. So that cannot be taken away from. That is the sense I get from meeting, African.
They did what Jaramogi and Kenyatta Mzee didn't do.
That is.
You can't take away that from Raila and Uhuru.
You can't. At least the way it is looked at from the outside. Kenya, however, is a slightly different country than the Tanzanians. Throughout since independence, Kenya was always at the back of the line when it came to supporting the independent struggles of other African countries, of supporting issues that require solidarity within the southern countries, supporting the freedom of peoples who were under colonial rule across the world. Pushing back against different forms of imperialism, whether it came in the form of government or private sector. Kenya even had relations with apartheid South Africa. So Kenya, Malawi, Ivory Coast are quite unique in that respect. And so even the Africans who say this is a sign of maturity always temper it and say, but yeah, we know these Kenyans don't have a history of solidarity, of putting personal interests behind and actually acting in the national interest.
So if we look like we are giving reprieve, do you believe that Odinga and Kenyatta have the set of skills to understand what they have beaten?
These are experienced political players.
What are you? Can be here saying, they just sat down and just said handshake.
No.
What if they're going to shock her?
No. I think that our politicians are experienced. Kenya has not had a military coup. We've not had those kind of disruptions. So our politicians are experienced operators. Yeah. The challenge is their constituencies, both formal and informal, political and family and friends, and the extent to which they are hostage to those constituencies. But in terms of capacity to do political deals, the Kenyan elite is amongst the best.
John, what about the Kenyan people? How do you read them? Are the Kenyan people aware? Are they alert? Are they incapable? Are they ethnic? Are they Kikuyus and Luos and Kalenjins?
I think more Kenyans are more aware of, especially the younger generation.
Because John,
than never before. No, look at the generation of your own children. They're intermarrying more than our generation ever did. So, I mean, I think they have a completely different view of themselves within Kenya. And even Kenya for them is a small thing. They're Africans. They're global citizens and are quite irritated by this petty politics.
So, John, why are they so loud on Twitter and never loud on elections? These people you defend.
Which election?
So that's election? They were compromised.
Which election? The last election we had was in 2002. 2013 was a joke. 2017 was a farce. So, the last election was 2002. So then we are left as hostages to processes that what we are very good at is lining up. And even the foreign observer said, these Kenyans can really line up. They wake up early, they're polite, pregnant women are allowed to go in the front, wazee wanabebwa. We behave beautifully, but we cannot count. We cannot deliver ballots. So we haven't had a reasonably legitimate election since 2002, which is part of the reason we have the kind of problems we have today.
Thank you very much for coming to Point Blank.
Thank you, Tony.
And I am privileged and honored
that
you are here. KTN.
And keep it up.
I hope you watch
keep it up.
Point Blank. I hope you watch the show. But we'll always be honest, John. And you come and tell truth to power whenever you need to come. You're welcome.
So long as so long as you don't turn politics into, one of the things that is alarming is politics has been turned into entertainment.
sometimes on TV. Yet the gravity of the issues facing Kenyans, you've just said it. We have a referendum, boundaries. These are all important things that are coming. So keep it up, stay the course.
Wana Kenya, my cousin brother, Mheshimiwa John Githongo, my senior, has spoken truth to power. I hope they have heard. This is KTN News, Point Blank.
Point Blank by TG was filmed on location at the Nairobi Serena Hotel.